Today on the TMZ Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the TMZ Podcast. I'm Charlie Cotton and today I'm joined by Derek Kaufman.
Good to see you. We got big stories and they're quite legal. Is that why you invited me?
Yeah, we
I
wanted
thought it was our friendship, but it's just you're here for my legal advice.
Yeah, well, we wanted our funniest co-host to talk about
Tupac's murder?
the most serious true crime-ish episode of TMZ. There's some pretty dark stories today. We're going to talk about Jason Aldean, the country star. He's got a new song out and he's having to come out and deny that it's a song about lynching. A lot of people think it's about lynching.
That's heavy. All right. Does it
That's
get lighter after that?
Of course it does. We're going to turn to the Gilgo Beach murders.
Oh, lovely.
And we're going to talk about that's the biggest true crime thing gripping the nation. But to begin with, this is the biggest story, I think, in TMZ land. Tupac Shakur, the murder of Tupac Shakur.
The unsolved murder of Tupac Shakur.
The
Yes.
case is alive.
It's alive. He was shot and killed in September of 1996. I was 16 years old. I'm an old man. I'm 43 years old right now. This was one of the biggest moments of my lifetime. Harvey always talks about the assassination of JFK and how it shook his life. For people my age who listened to rap in the 90s, this was a momentous event.
You don't seem like a rap
I was
enjoyer.
a huge rap fan. I know I don't seem it, but I'm way cooler than you guys give me credit for.
Maybe.
You guys think I was a geek in chemistry class.
Yes.
I was bumping Tupac
Really?
and Biggie. In Florida, you could be a fan of both. It didn't really matter. We East Coast, West Coast. We just like good rap. This is wild because I assumed that this case was going to remain cold and there would be documentaries, but it would never really be solved. And the reason I say that is not because there's racism in the police department, which I believe there also is systemic sort of racism. But as time goes on, evidence deteriorates, witnesses die, memories fade. It's hard to solve crimes this far after. We're 27 years later to have anybody who could say something about this crime that is credible. It's hard to believe.
So
but
what
here
happened?
we go.
Tell me what happened. New information.
So the Las Vegas PD basically served a search warrant on a home in Las Vegas. Remember, he was shot and killed in Las Vegas after a boxing match
Mike
that
Tyson,
night, after the
yep.
Mike Tyson fight. So they serve a warrant, and that means they're going to go search a home. And this home is connected to a man named Keith D. Keith D. Has a wife. His wife's home is the home being searched. Now, Keith D. is the uncle of a man named Orlando Anderson. Orlando Anderson is a huge name in Tupac lore because before Tupac was killed in Vegas, there was security footage in a Vegas casino of Suge, Tupac, and others jumping Orlando Anderson. So the rumor had always been that Orlando Anderson got jumped, was embarrassed or upset after getting jumped, and later that evening orchestrated a retaliatory murder of Tupac from a car. And Keith D., the uncle of this guy, or the purported uncle, says he was in the car and saw his nephew squeeze off the shots that killed Tupac.
So why didn't we go after this guy at the time? Like, this might have been the biggest story and biggest thing to you when you were 16, but in Australia, when I was probably how old? Like 10 at the time?
Yeah.
It didn't even, I
It didn't even
know.
register.
Didn't register. I'm learning it. This is all news to me right now, so tell me about it.
So I don't know exactly why they didn't investigate this because it is sort of just out there and was out there quite early on. Orlando Anderson, by the way, is dead. He died in a shootout years later. But I think what everyone clammed up about is Keith D. is a purported Crip. Tupac had ties to the Bloods. Those are gang rivalries. And when there's a shooting, there's a bit of a code of nobody says anything. You know,
Right.
If this was a high up and high level Crip, no one's going to out him because there could be reprisals and you could get hurt if you do that. So everyone just clams up. You know,
Is this a snitches get stitches
a
thing?
little bit of that, right?
Okay.
It's not, the world is not filled with Tekashis, or at least back in the 90s, it was much tighter. They were more, everyone knew what to do in these situations and obviously didn't cooperate to the extent that the police could put together a case. And now, but the cases remain alive until they're solved. Tupac was still murdered. We know that. So it never actually closed the case. And there must have been something that triggered enough for a search warrant. You got to have probable cause.
Like the cops must have in the last few days or weeks or whatever got some sort of tip or what's
It could be a tip, but it would have to be credible enough. So tips come in all the time, and there has to be a basis enough to tell a judge, hey, because in the under the Fourth Amendment here, you're not allowed to be searched unless there is probable cause, unless there's a warrant that they can serve. They have enough in that document that the judge says, okay, you have reason to suspect that a crime has been committed and something connected to that crime is in that house. I'm going to let you go search that house.
So the FBI, the cops, they're looking for something. Have they executed this search warrant? They've been in the house?
Apparently, they've been in the house. We don't know if it's been returned. We don't know if the search warrant returned anything valuable. Because
Right.
you go in the house, you hope to find the gun or some evidence or whatever they're looking for. We don't know what came back yet. But what we do know is that the wife of Keith D also has a home in Compton.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you that earlier, a couple years ago, a gun that was purported to be the gun that fired the shots that killed Tupac was discovered in a house in Compton owned by a woman who was connected to a Crip. And she's never been thought to be one of the people in the car, but it was the girlfriend of a Crip. Keith D is a known Crip, and this is his wife's house in Compton. So if that's the same person that owns the house in Vegas and the house in Compton, and the weapon is assumed to be found in that house in Compton, maybe there's a connection there. Maybe that gun is sort of this prized possession in certain circles,
Man.
and it exists. Now, I don't know how they can still run forensics, I guess. You pull the bullets out of someone and you can see little engravings about what gun it came from, and you can try to match the bullet to the gun. But again, this evidence is very old, and it'll be hard to sort of piece this all together at this point in time. We'll have to see.
That'll be crazy if they solve the Tupac case.
It would be nuts.
Then they'll open the b.i.g case again, or
Yeah, the b.i.g case is also unsolved, and that was a year later in L.A. that happened. We had our holiday party at the place, not because of this, but at the Peterson Auto Museum, where b.i.g was shot outside of the Peterson Auto Museum. So this is that will certainly be the next focus of the public. I'm not sure that cops will immediately say, "Oh, now we have to solve b.i.g." I don't think that's how cops work. They'll wait for tips, but it is interesting.
Interesting. All right, that one's going to be a great thing.
Are you now more interested, even though you're all the way in Australia?
I
You first
am.
learned about Tupac's murder. I'm sorry to break the news to you.
I know. I'm actually very sad. I'm going to go and listen to All Eyes on Me.
Okay, that's one of my favorite double albums.
Is that a good one?
Yes.
All right. On to our next story.
Mm-hmm.
Jason Aldean, very famous country star. Well, a little while ago, he put out a song called Try That in a Small Town, and it didn't even really have a blip on the radar. But now he's put out a video clip to do with this. And
describe the video to me, because I think that's important for the message of his song.
Well, it's what building is he in front of? He's in front of like some important building.
Yeah, it looks like maybe like a government building or courthouse or something police related.
And there's images flashing on the building, basically of the 2020 riots, you know, where it was Black Lives Matter, and they was trying to stand up for race relations in this country, and basically this
protesting systemic racism in police departments, right?
And I mean, the song's title is "Try That in a Small Town," and so people are saying it's a pro-lynching song because he says stuff like, "Cuss out a cop, spit in his face, stomp on the flag, and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough? Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here, we take care of our own."
This is the problem for me. So I'm not in favor of cussing out cops and spitting on their faces, and it's fine to describe that you don't like that and you actually think police do a good job. I'm okay with that. If
Everybody's
that's his position,
on board with like that.
Look, if that's his position, is that cops are getting a bad name and they actually serve and protect in large part, aside from a few bad apples, that may be his position. I'm really troubled by these lyrics where he says, "You think you're tough? Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road." To me, is a wink, a dog whistle, a sort of nod in the direction of one of the biggest tragedies we've had recently, which was Ahmaud Arbery running down the road. And he says, here we take care of our own. Remember, those two guys in the pickup truck were not officers. They weren't like a uniform PD. They were guys who were deputized, right, by the police to like help out if there's ever an issue.
Right.
You guys get to go solve it as well. And I think he's sort of alluding to it. I read that as he's at least winking in the direction of like, see how far you get down the road if you cause trouble in my small town. And I hate that. I think that is racist. Now, do I think he likes lynching? No, I don't think he's like going around and sort of terrorizing, black families in his neighborhood. I don't think he's doing that. But I think it's gross. I think it's a gross thing to sing about.
He's kind of, in a way, sort of maybe appealing to some of his sort of his fans, his
Yeah,
base.
dog whistling, right?
Who are small town folk who probably didn't agree with the 2020 riots and are saying basically, this is America.
It's our country. It's a
our
little
country.
of that, right?
Look, he is denying and says it's ridiculous that anyone has that interpretation, and it's kind of like the woke liberals that are, implying this. But I mean,
I want to give him his due. He says, while I can try to respect others to have their own interpretation of a song with music, this one goes too far.
I like that accent,
like,
that affectation. It's good.
He invited this. I would feel more badly for him if the internet spun a conspiracy theory. You know what I mean? Sometimes they're like reading into things too much. But he put up a video where he clearly said this is about the rabble rousing of the Black Lives Matter protest. That's the imagery he's putting on the screen.
Yes.
He's clearly pro-police, and he wrote a lyric like that, which is inviting me and people on the internet to have this interpretation. Now, he can deny it, and I'm fine with that. I'm not in his head. I don't know his heart. Maybe this is sincere and he didn't intend it to be so gross. But I'm also not crazy to see grossness in these lyrics, right?
But I mean, even
not a tinfoil hat.
Even the title, "Try That in a Small Town," implies that you want to enact violence
Exactly.
on someone who's protesting, for their race.
That's what I would want to ask him. Hey, Jason, okay, you don't. Lynching is a big word, right?
Yes.
And I think he got distracted by the word lynching because
Yes.
it's so baked with so much emotion. How about this, Jason? What'd you mean by try that in a small town? Did you mean like try it and I'll shake my fist from down the road? Or did you mean like try it and I'm going to run you down and hurt you? Like,
Yes.
That's what we interpret the word try that.
I think maybe he wants us to interpret it that way because, any publicity is good publicity sort of thing. Like,
yes.
This song now is one of the biggest songs in the country because everyone's listening to it to form their own interpretation. So it'll only, please his base potentially, and even the people who don't
are
like
against it are curious enough to listen.
They're still listening. So
I hate that though. He's like courting that kind of controversy.
It's kind of smart in a way. Like,
sure,
if that is what he's doing, then it's somewhat sort of like diabolical. But it's also smart in terms of getting more listeners and potentially getting more fans who are of the same belief that he is.
Yeah.
Small town folk.
Yeah, he's stoking that divisiveness, right? Because, some of his fans, like, white listeners who are anti-BLM and so forth are going to say like, no, that's not what we meant. You know what we meant. Like, it's all like sort of a wink and a nod. Like, just keep that out of our town. You take that to the big cities, but we don't do that here. And I just... I don't like it personally, and I'm not like sort of a bleeding heart on this issue or anything like that. I think it's a very, very complicated issue. I just think this kind of tweaking and putting that kind of imagery reads kind of gross.
Well,
to
I
me.
mean, he put out the song ages ago and no one like cared or no one even really knew it wasn't a story. And so he's like, I'm going to double down. Let's put up a video clip, which really sends the message home. If you haven't seen the video clip, I mean...
It just does. That's why when he clutches his pearls... And Jason Aldean, I don't think is a bad guy in general. He was the guy on the stage when the Vegas shooting happened. I just think he should be extra sensitive to, like, calls to violence.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, this is weird to nod in the direction of, like, try that here and I'll beat you down. Because that's clearly what try that means.
Yes.
Is we don't take kindly to that.
It means violence.
Yeah, it just means violence. Like, you see how far down the street you get? What does that mean? We're going to wave at you?
Yeah.
Like, it means we're going to beat you up.
Well, Sheryl Crow agrees with us. She says, she's from a small town, and this is just... She says it's lame. It's just lame what he's trying to do.
And it's a little scary if it like gets in the head of the wrong people.
But if he's a businessman, I mean, this is
he may make money from it.
He might.
But
all right.
Anyway.
On to our last, and usually our fun story providing levity to the episode.
Not much levity here.
The Gilgo Beach murders. Gilgo. I always mispronounce that word, but it's Gilgo, isn't it?
I think it is Gilgo, and it sounds too fun for what the subject matter is. Gilgo sounds like a fun word.
It does.
It's like a Family Guy like reference, giggity or something.
Right. Well, okay, I'm going to stop laughing because Rex Heuermann is his name. Heuermann. He was obviously, arrested in connection with these murders. Now an escort, a former escort, is coming out and saying, look, I went on a date with this guy.
So these murders 3 sex workers were killed. Okay, so now we're talking with and hearing the experience, if you believe it, of someone who had dinner with him as an escort and could have potentially been murdered if that was his MO, to kill these prostitutes. And Rex has just been arrested; he hasn't been convicted or anything, but that's a scary story. So
he hasn't been convicted, but there is a hell of a lot of smoke. I mean, there's phone records connecting him to it. He had burner phones, which he had to buy with his own money. And
Sure.
there was DNA on a pizza that the FBI collected and linked it to a piece of hair at the crime.
They think they got their guy.
They got their guy. There's car descriptions. There's a lot of evidence that points to, okay, Rex did it. And so now this former escort is coming out and say, look, I could have been one of the 3 or 4 or potentially far more. He's being investigated for so many more murders now. They're trying to connect him to everything.
Yeah.
And a former escort says that could have been me. We went on a date. He was sort of not bragging about the murders, but he was like, are you interested in true crime?
Yeah.
Have you heard about the Gilgo Beach murders? And then apparently he said details that weren't openly available to the public. And he was talking to this. Then he tried to get her in his car, and apparently she didn't get in his car. She got away. But now, looking back on it, she goes, yeah, I suspected it. I didn't say anything because she was under parole herself.
Yeah, she was a sex worker, so she didn't want to have much police contact and get herself in trouble. She says she was on probation at the time, so if she reports this and they run her name and they see, oh, you're on probation, why were you with him? Oh, it was because you're an escort, and they might have gotten her on a probation violation. So she may have just wanted to keep her nose out of that business to avoid trouble for herself. But the way she describes it is wild, where she says it seemed as if he wanted to brag about something, but he couldn't brag about it. And I know that sort of like interaction. I know what she's describing, where he was just like reminiscing about the great kills, but really couldn't confess at that point in time. It's scary. I mean, I think she's probably reading these stories and like piecing together her prior experience with this guy and being like, oh my gosh, I could have been killed.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people might say, I mean, even I think potentially like, well, if you thought that back then, why didn't you go to the cops? Like, you could have maybe prevented another murder.
Yeah, you might have a little guilt about it.
But yeah, she is also someone who's, an escort who's on parole. She's had bad experiences with police in the past. Best just stay out of it. But she says that when he was talking about these murders, it was almost like he was recollecting and like, casting himself back in his memory, talking gleefully about the murders that happened right around where they were having their date. This is like...
It's scary. Some of these serial killer stories are very scary because we did a story about his arrest and it was eerie. He didn't really resist. The cop said, we're here to arrest you about those Gilgo Beach murders. And he very calmly said, I didn't have anything to do with those. But it must have been eerie. The cops say when they arrested him, he didn't put up a fight. He sort of might have expected after all this time and all these murders that his day was coming to at least face these charges.
But I mean, he has a family. He's got a wife and kids, and apparently they were kept in the dark the whole time. She was out of town while he was committing the murders, apparently.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just interesting to listen to people sort of like talking about their interactions with not only Rex, but his wife too, who seemed like a normal lady. It's just one of those old things like, how do you have a serial killer living in your home and you don't know? It's one of these...
think of them as like monsters, and a few of them are the night, the night, what was his name?
Crawler?
Night Stalker.
Stalker?
Sorry, thank you. The Night Stalker. Nightcrawler was a movie with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh, okay.
Night Stalker was this guy who had a pentagram on his... Richard Ramirez was his name. He had a pentagram on his palm, and he would go into court very scary and haggard and look kind of homeless, and he looked like a monster. But other serial killers are like mowing lawns in suburbia, and that is even scarier, right?
It is.
That he like lived among the people. He had a wife and kids.
Yes, 2 kids.
Had a family, but had this entirely dark other life, potentially, if Rex is guilty, and it sounds like they have a pretty good case against him. That to me is even more frightening than the Richard Ramirez or the Charlie Manson, who's like, a little troll gremlin. Like it's like, just avoid those people.
It could be anyone,
Could be anyone. They could be among us.
Yeah. Well, this has been kind of we've had a lot more fun than I expected talking about these 3 grisly stories.
We made the best of it.
We did. We really did. That's like kind of the tagline to the podcast. TMZ Podcast, we'll make the best of it.
We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.